everyone, and welcome to OT 245, Intro to Research Methodology. Today's topic is on survey research, developing a research instrument, in other words, a survey, and everything that you always wanted to know about surveys. My name is Melissa Kay, and we'll go ahead and get started. We have 4 objectives today. The first is to describe the features and purposes of surveys, and within that, some of the pros and cons. Then explain the process of developing a survey. Third, we will define the different types of survey scales and provide examples. And last, we would want to describe the data analysis that's involved in surveys and what we can learn and what we can't. All right, so about surveys. Surveys are descriptive research. In other words, they are non-experimental. There's no independent and dependent variables that get manipulated. There's no randomization. We send the survey out and we see who responds. And for those reasons, it's very difficult to establish cause and effect from a survey. Some general information. Surveys determine practices or opinions of a population. So we ask people what they think and how they feel about something and what they believe. And there's 2 different data collection methods. Questionnaires, which are a pre-formatted set of inquiries, or interview, which is either in person or virtually, but with an individual or group. Surveys are descriptive, exploratory in some cases, let me find out about this, or explanatory. Sometimes we're looking for a reason for why people behave the way they do. Again, they're not experimental, and they tend to have a large sample size, especially if they're a quality survey, because we know that the more people are involved in a survey, the more representative that will be of the population, and also the more reliable the survey will be. But it's important to remember that a survey, by its very nature, is a snapshot. In other words, one moment or 1 hour or 5 minutes in time in the life of an individual. So we can't really expand out and infer anything about people from a survey because it's just this little short snapshot, as opposed to a longitudinal study or an ethnography. So pros and cons of surveys. Well, it has some advantages. They provide original data, in other words, from the participants themselves. They can reflect the population, which is quite nice. And there is a like form from everyone. So everyone is getting the same instrument, and then we can interpret the results. Disadvantages, they rely on response rates. So think about the times when you've received an email or seen a flyer. Please come and fill out our survey. It will only take you 5 minutes, 15 minutes, a half an hour, and you're like, right? And the quality of data that we get from surveys varies depending on who's answering it, how they're answering it, how much time they take, how thoughtful they are, and how they interpret the questions. Survey development. There's a lot that goes into surveys, right? So it would at first glance appear like, oh, we just write a bunch of questions and then we see how people answer them. But there's a whole art and science to developing a survey. So the appearance of the survey and layout is going to affect how well people understand it and how likely they are to engage with it. The length of it. When I get surveys that say it'll only take you 45 minutes, I say nope. So it's important that surveys be long enough that they really cover the area in question, but not so long that you lose respondents because the survey is just so lengthy, or people stop paying attention after a certain period of time, right? And just sort of go through the paces at the end of the survey. The order of questions is important. How it unfolds actually affects how people will answer. And the demographic information that one asks for is another aspect of survey design. Now, in some cases, we're going to want to collect a lot of demographic data. But for example, when I did my doctoral research, it was with occupational therapy students. And we actually made a decision, I made a decision with my advisor not to collect a lot of demographic data because by its very nature, it would identify in some ways the folks who are in the study. So for example, there's a much larger proportion of women than men or non-binary people in the OT program. And so asking about gender would be a signal of who it was that was the participant. So that's just one small example. But in general, we can gather a bunch of demographic information, which would be helpful. Cover letter. So you start off with writing a letter that says, here I am, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, this is why I'm asking you to fill out this survey. And often, this is what I hope that society or occupational therapy or whatever, whoever the readers are of the eventual product of the survey, how it will benefit them, right? So why it's important. Cover letter guidelines, you guys know this: professional, concise, explains the purpose, assures privacy and anonymity. That's always important when people are volunteering to give you their information, and provides clear instructions for how to fill out the survey. Just a tiny word about privacy and anonymity. You know, we've kind of faced a cultural shift where younger generations value their privacy and anonymity less. Some of that has to do with the preponderance of social media. Some of it has to do with, I don't know what. But at the end of the day, we really want to assure people that their privacy and their anonymity and confidentiality will be protected. All right, so it's first of all, there's two different types of questions: open-ended and closed-ended. Open-ended questions tend to be less structured, and they explore what the concept that you're looking at is. It's preferable to have open-ended if you're asking something complex. It may be difficult to code or analyze because it is open-ended, so it's not a yes or no or a 50% of the time, right? And it requires more time and effort from the respondent because they actually have to think and write. Now, remember, you know, we may be interviewing those people, and so that may be a forum for open-ended questions as well as an actual survey. Closed questions are more structured. They have standard answers. So, you know, never, probably not, sometimes, probably so, and absolutely yes, right? Just as an example. It facilitates answering sensitive questions because people don't have to be revealing, they just have to respond. It's generally considered easier for the respondent, and it's very easy to code and analyze. When we're composing questions, each question should have 3 attributes. It should have a focus, one focus. It should be as brief as possible and as simple as possible. Now that sounds totally logical, like duh, no-brainer, right? But when we're writing questions, we can get in the weeds a little bit with that. And so we always want to come back to the fact that the question is focused just on one thing. If you focus on more than one thing, the person can't accurately answer. It has to be brief and simply stated. Writing reliable questions. So you know at this point that reliability is very important in research, right? So to help with that, we use complete sentences. We ensure that the meaning is the same for all the respondents. Now, of course, that's difficult to do, but we try to take out anything that can be misinterpreted or interpreted in multiple ways. Some of those things might happen due to cultural differences, age differences, educational differences, background differences, a variety of things. We want to define all the terms that we use in the question clearly. Want to consider reading level. It should be appropriate for the intended respondents. And in healthcare, when considering healthcare literacy, we're looking at a 6th grade reading level. So as much as is possible, we want to not dumb down the questions, but make them very accessible. Avoid the following: double negatives. So if you say, if a question, I can't even think of one. If a question has I don't never, or the answers kind of are confusing as to whether you should answer in the positive or the negative, that's problematic. And sorry, I don't have an example at the tip of my tongue. We can go over this in class. So make a note if you need to know about double negatives. Double barrels is another thing, and I alluded to it with the previous one of the previous slides. So double barrels actually ask about 2 things at the same time, right? And so what happens if the respondent, if you have a question about somebody being polite and concerned? Are you polite and concerned when you're dealing with an emergency situation, right? Well, the person could be polite or concerned or both or neither, right? If they're both or neither, they don't have a hard time answering. But if they're just one, they have a very hard time answering because the question applies to 2 different concepts. So we want to avoid double barrels. And finally, we want to avoid having a don't know option because people will opt for that simply because it's easier than figuring out how they really feel, or they might not know how they feel. And we're in a little way, by not having that option, kind of encouraging them to think about how they feel and decide. So we want to avoid this don't know because that is not helpful for our data. Anytime we write a questionnaire, we want to pilot it. So that would mean trying it out on colleagues or acquaintances. Then we revise the questionnaire based on the responses, and it's a smallish group, right, of folks. Then we revise and we send to a trial sample. So notice that we try it out on people who aren't going to be in the study. Then we try it out on a trial, which is a small group that potentially would be in our study population. We analyze the results, we revise again, we determine validity and reliability before we administer, and we want to also establish face validity, like does it seem like it measures what we're trying to measure, and also content validity. So do we cover all our bases of having all the aspects of the phenomenon we're trying to measure included in the survey? I think that's it. Okay, so we'll get in a little bit into validity and reliability as well. We also need to make a bunch of decisions about items. How many, the type of scale we'll use, and we'll look at that in a minute. Positive and negative items. So are we going to ask, would you like to? Or would you never want to, right? So how do we phrase it? And that's going to affect how people answer. Sometimes we have positive items and we have negative items that ask basically the same thing, just to kind of act as a check that people are paying attention to the question and answering consistently. The item intensity, so how much is it? How sensitive is it? How powerful is it? How much information does it give us? And, at the start of a survey, we sort of want to ease people in. I do this with your exams as well. I give you, on the first question, I give you something that I'm hoping that you will really easily know the answer to. And then I go into more intense items. So same. Item timeframes. So you might ask a question about right now, how do you feel? How did you feel last week? How do you think you'll feel in a year, etc.? And then wording. Again, we talked about wording. Clarity, avoid jargon, make it as short as possible while still maintaining the integrity of the question. All right, you're halfway. So get up, stretch, get a drink of water, cup of tea, go to the restroom, shake your body out, come back, and we'll finish up with surveys. All right, welcome back. So let's look at survey scales. Now, there are many different kinds of scales, and these are just a few of them that we're going to go over. Likert, Guttman, and Semantic Differential. So don't think that there's only these three, but this is kind of a representation of some of them. And it bears noting at this point that there's a lot more information about scales and measurement in your presenter notes. So do download the slide deck and get that information. Okay, so first up is a Likert scale. And a true Likert scale is based on an amount of agreement to disagreement. So this is a true Likert scale, right? Indicate your level of agreement to the following statement by circling one of the numbers below on a scale of 1 to 5. So we want to explain what we're asking them to do, not just assume. And then the question is, or the statement, it's not a question, it's actually a statement because you have to agree to or disagree or somewhere in the middle, right? Does that make sense? We're not asking them how much, we're not asking them a question about something. We're making a statement and asking them to indicate their degree of agreement. All right, so 245 is the most interesting class I have ever taken. And we have the options of strongly disagree, disagree, undecided, because you're brand new to it, agree, or strongly agree. So that would be an example of a Likert scale. Now, we often use Likert-like scales where we have different items besides agreement to disagreement, but a true Likert scale is this level of agreement. Here's a Guttman scale example, and a Guttman scale is based on checking agreement with provided statements. So again, they're not questions, they're statements, and in this one, you can answer in the affirmative as many as is appropriate or true for you. So please check each statement with which you agree, right? So there may be multiple answers on one question or on one page. I am willing to permit immigrants to live in the U.S., live in my town, live in my neighborhood, live next door to me. It would be okay if my child married an immigrant. So notice that the intensity, right, that I just talked about of the questions or statements is getting increasingly higher. And it's a different kind of scale because you're not just circling one answer. You're checking as many as appropriate. Okay, and then the third type that we're going to look at is a semantic differential scale, and it's based on ratings of qualities, attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs that offer a continuum of response. So a Likert scale offers a continuum from agree to disagree. The semantic differential uses like a continuum of opposite terms, for lack of a better word. So useless to helpful, boring to fascinating, difficult to easy. And notice that useless, boring, and difficult are on one side, and they're closer to the ones, and helpful, fascinating, and easy, the more positive attributes, are on the 5 side. Let's see. Let me just read my own notes and make sure I haven't forgotten to tell you anything. Okay. The only other thing that's there is some other examples of pairs of terms. So this is a name the scale, and this is a type of scale that was not included in our examples, but is frequently seen in research. I've included it to encourage you to visit this website, and the website is in your presenter notes. And the site, which is called Measuring You, very clearly and simply describes a wide variety of rating scales with examples, and it's a really good resource. So go there, find out what kind of scale this is, note it down for class. If I forget to answer, you can bring it up, and visit Measuring You just as a resource, okay? Thanks. Other survey considerations. All right. This is a visual model of some other issues, right? So we look at and how a survey works in the larger scale. So what we're really after is the characteristics of the population, right? Then we take a sample of the population to answer questions, and then we look at the answers respondents give. So it's sort of a step-down approach, what we want and how we get there. The issue, there's two issues. One is how closely the sample responding to the questionnaire actually mirrors the population, and then how well the answers measure characteristics to be described. So the sample mirroring the population, is crucial, right? So demographic information will help. Sampling in the right places to get respondents who mirror the population is important, and taking into consideration that people who answer surveys may have a certain reason for doing so, whereas people who don't respond have another perspective, and we want to be sure that that doesn't muddy the waters of answering surveys. The issue about how well the answers measure characteristics is one of validity, right? And the one other piece of information is that we start off with a theoretical view, right? So a theory or a framework to guide our construction, administration, and analysis of surveys. All right. So non-response, in other words, people don't answer, is a source of bias, right? So again, just as I said, what is different about the people who answer versus not answer, and how does that affect the representativeness of our sample to the population? There's a variety of ways to reduce non-response rate. Get more access to the respondents up close and impersonal. Enlist cooperation, basically beg them or give them incentives to answer, right? In some way motivate them. Make the survey clear and easy to read and reply. So if it's doesn't take a lot of effort, people are much more likely to respond. I know I've started surveys at various points, and as I got into it, I was like, no, it was too tough. It was too confusing. It was too long. It was too this or that or the other thing, right? Also following up and putting out additional pleas for participation. And finally, resampling a sample of non-respondents. So we get the people that we get, and then we look at the people we didn't get, and we go back and try to get them again. There's some ethical issues in surveys, and they are as follows. And the pages that this is about are in your presenter notes. So informing respondents adequately about what they're signing up for and why and what your survey will do. Protecting the respondents, their confidentiality and anonymity, and also protecting them from being upset from the survey contents, potentially, if it's a sensitive subject. Benefits. So what we choose to give them in terms of benefits can be an ethical issue. Like if I'm going to pay everybody who responds $500, they're probably going to say whatever I want them to say, right? And then finally, the ethical responsibility of interviewers when we're talking about interviews, either singularly or in a focus group situation. So it's our responsibility to not lead people to answer in a certain way, to not put pressure on them, to not use our power in the situation in any way, and to be interviewers that are that have integrity and are as objective as possible. All right. Then analyzing survey data. So this would be the last step, right? We make it, we administer it. Well, we make it, we test it, we revise it, all that stuff. Then we administer it. Now we're analyzing the survey data. So we want to statistically adjust for non-response. So all those people that didn't answer, even though they didn't answer, they go into our pot in a statistical manner. We need to adjust for items that were not answered because missing data can be skewing to the data. We give different probabilities of selection. So that means that we may weight questions, in other words, make some worth more than others. And then we consider the effects of sample design on statistics calculation. So that is a really a big mouthful that basically means that we look at the sample design and then we look at the statistics that are possible and we match them in a way that makes sense, is ethical, is effective, and is helping us get at the information that we want. All right, we're in the home stretch. Types of survey data. So we're going to review just briefly types of data, right? So we've talked about this a couple times, and honestly, you guys, I have seen this many times, and the review is always useful to me because in my head, I sometimes can't keep track of which is which. All right, so classification of variables. So if you're in that boat, don't feel bad. Classification of variables. So we have ratio, which is continuous, and interval, which is discrete. And we went over those terms before. And then we have categorical, right? And there's two forms. There's nominal or naming, and ordinal or ordering, putting things in a particular order, but we cannot guarantee that the intervals between the categories are equal. Remember that? Ring a bell? Okay. So when we're looking at surveys, ratio or continuous data is numeric and it can take any value. Interval is discrete, it's countable, it's ordered and numeric, and there's no smooth transition from one value to the next. So you're either a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or a 4, right? Ordinal has a natural order, and nominal does not have a natural order. It's just the naming of different categories. Examples. Ratio, height, weight, or age, right? It's continuous from 0 on up. Interval, number of students, number of strokes. Ordinal, educational level or socioeconomic status, right? So there's a natural order that goes from a kindergarten education to a post-professional doctorate, right? And nominal would be things like gender or ethnicity because they don't necessarily go together, but they're categories. All right. So what I'd love for you to do is to jot down your answers to these questions and those on the next couple of slides, and we'll review this in class. So what type of variable, right? So we have BMI, number of trials, frequency of religious activities, employment status, age range, and gender. Another slide. So slow down, have a look at this, and jot down your answers. And this is, a very common. This is a very common structure for a survey, right? And then a third example. And that's the end. You've reached the end. So we will revisit this information in class. Please jot down any questions. Also take a few minutes to think about what type of data, because that's going to become important when we consider writing survey questions and also analyzing survey data. And I thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you have a great day. I'll see you in class. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.